Good evening, everybody. Hi, I hope you all had a good day. I think I fixed the audio issues that I was having earlier today, so sorry to those who tuned in and you were hearing a lot of popping. Special thanks to Matt Fallow for being an incredible guide through this and also, getting me this incredible interface so I can have more keyboards set up. So, this discussion today, let me just fix my screen here. This discussion today is going to talk about, continue to talk about playing outside. And we're going to keep it real brief because, there's so much good live music going on right now. The coolest thing was like going through Facebook and finding all these amazing live streams that have been going on. It's been really inspirational to watch all you guys play. And you should guys check out, make sure you donate to your musicians, all the virtual tip jars. If you look at the bottom of your screen, right there, bink. I do accept donations. Some of you have been unbelievably gracious and very, very, very kind. So thank you so much to those who have already donated. I'll keep it anonymous just out of respect. But wow, that was like, thank you. That really means a lot. So let's kind of talk about how to continue playing out, right? And that's a big thing that when you're playing out, how do we continue to do this? So we were talking last time about the idea of 3-1 substitutions and 7-1 substitutions. Today, we are going to be talking about sequencing, right? What is a sequence? Sequence, very simply, is if you take like an idea, right? Like let's just use like Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? And then moving it up to a different key, like, or, right? Now, obviously, you're not going to be jamming out to Mary Had a Little Lamb, or maybe you will. Hey, that's that might be the song of the day, right? As we all are cooped up inside, we might just be playing Mary Had a Little Lamb after a while, right? So the idea is that, how do you take this idea, right? We were talking about, again, the 3-1 subs, right? With this and the 7-1 subs, right? So we're going to kind of stretch past that. We're going to deal with the idea of how do we take something like that idea played like Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? And how do you move it around, right? And this is the process of sequencing is another great technique and a great avenue to explore when playing outside changes. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to set up just a very simple loop, and bear in mind that this is all live, so warts and all, right? So I'm going to set up a simple little loop here. We're probably just going to keep it in I don't know. We'll see whatever key, and I'll dictate what key I am playing it in. And then what we'll do is I will show you a very simple soloing structure idea and how I can make it further outside the changes, okay? So let me set something up right here. So right now I am in D minor, okay? So we have D minor just going underneath. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some chords, okay? I'm going to root them around D minor. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start moving this shape chromatically. And this is the first way. So those of you who are chord players, this is a great technique. You can sit there and take your same shape and move it in half steps around, and it makes you sound really hip and really cool. So check this out. So basically what I was doing is I was taking a D chordal voicing, right? So we had D, G, C, F, A, right? And just move around. And then you start voicing them out further. So I bring in some like altered tones and things like that, which is really, when you're looking at this, I'm playing like a G dominant 7 over like an E major over G dominant 7, which you can, say the G sharp has no place in D minor. But that's the whole point, right? Is as long as you have a constant, right? In this case, the bass lines are constant, right? You need something to glue you as you're moving around, right? So check this out. What I'll do is I'll sit there and I'll lay down some chords here. I will keep the chords a little bit more simple, right? But the idea is that I can move them around. So let me show you how you can move them around again. Then I'll show you in a soloing idea how to continue to build yourself moving outside. Check this out. to build a chord pattern for a solo on top. Check this out. So that's all in, right? So you can hear like that's all within the chords. Now let's start sidestepping, right? We're going to start taking the same idea, sequencing. We're going to take the same idea. I'm going to keep it really simple, and I'm going to move it around in half steps, okay? We're going to move things just bouncing around. And you're going to notice really coolly that you have this opportunity to take the same idea and just manipulate it and move it around in a series of different ways. Obviously not the most enthralling idea. You don't use it too much, right? If you use it too much like that, you end up finding yourself in a situation where you're just playing nonsense. It's just, it's good, but it's not great, right? You know, it's like, you have to use it carefully. So the way I always equate it, right, is like playing outside is kind of like adding, like, you know, saffron to a dish, right? Those of you who cook. You can't use too much of it, otherwise the specialness of it wears off. Or let me give another metaphor, right? Imagine you are a magician with a handful of tricks, and you have like this one fantastic close-up magic card trick, and you do it once, and the audience is like, oh my God, it's amazing. And then you do it again. The audience is like, that's cool, but I'm starting to figure out. By the third or fourth time, the allure wears off, and you are no longer taking an idea that was fresh and you're beating it to death. You're beating that horse to death, right? And that's the realistic thing, is that you have to use these tricks sparingly, right? I'm obviously focusing my discussion on it and like really highlighting it. Like obviously if I ever release a solo like that, I would be very embarrassed. I would not dig it too much, right? So realistically outside of that, right, you want to use these in little moments, okay? So let me show you another thing about motif development, okay? We're going to keep this loop going. This loop's going really quietly in the background now, okay? So what I'm going to do motif-wise, okay, is I'm going to build a pad on the Rev 2 here. I'm just going to do like a nice like pad because we have this moving chord underneath it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to the moog here, and I'm going to start building a solo that is built off of one idea, okay? So here's what I want you to picture, okay? And again, it's almost easier with the drummer, but I want you to picture this, right? You are going to take one small idea. Imagine like a snowball, right? When you build a snowman, we start with like a tiny little snowball, and we roll it around. And that same snowball, right, the same chord gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? But if you were to strip away all the extra layers, right, the same essential snowflakes that you started up, that is your original concept, right? That's your original build, your DNA, however you want to think about it. We can sit here and spout off metaphors until we're blue in the face, right? But the idea is that if you build one small idea and build it out and come back to it and build it out and come back to it, right? Sonny Rollins was like the king of doing this, right? In a way that you want to make sure that you're doing it with a compositional mindset, because if you just sit there and say like, oh man, I was going to do this idea, and then it starts to kind of dissolve into nothing, you're going to find yourself in a situation where your idea sounds cheapened, right? So you want to make sure that you're taking time to craft a good idea. So to spare time, this idea is going to be relatively simple, but I'll show you how we can keep coming back to like central core themes of it and then expanding out on it, okay? So I'm going to bring the volume of this up. I'm going to set another pad up, and then I'll show you a few examples of how you can take a small idea and build it out, but using it as like your key code of the whole solo. So check this out. Right, so you get the idea, right? I mean, obviously, it can build out more, but you keep hearing this idea that keeps coming back, right? Sorry about that, the delay. Right, that was your central core idea, and then what I'm doing is I'm building out from that, right? Like the idea is that you have that as you keep pivoting back to it, right? So think of like a hub and spoke, right? You have like the main idea is your hub, right? And you're going to go out to an idea, but before you can reinforce and go out to another spoke, you got to kind of double back and come back to it, right? And as long as you're kind of building into the as long as you're kind of building into the constant core of these ideas, your solos are going to have more meaning. And this is to kind of like wrap things up. This is my favorite definition of improvisation. So Herbie Hancock, those of you who are familiar, great. If you're not familiar with Herbie Hancock, you probably actually know more of his music than you realize. He's done, goodness, like Chameleon. If I have to play that song again, we have a problem. But, Chameleon, Watermelon Man, and then like all of the Headhunter stuff, and then beyond, right? Like Mondishi, which is one of my all-time favorite records, or my favorite song is Tell Me a Bedtime Story. That's some good listening. Right. Anyways. The way he defined improvisation was spontaneous composition. Love that definition. I use that with all my students, right? Because with improvisation, we just think of like, oh man, just make up whatever you want. Oh yeah, absolutely, you are. But think about the word composition, right? Composition is huge because that's a mindset of thinking about process, right? Thinking about motif, thinking about sequencing, thinking about rhythmic development, thinking about like energy development, right? There's a lot more about the element of thinking like you are like writing a symphony orchestra but on the spot, right? And that's a really hard thing to do because sometimes we have a tendency to overcomplicate and overdo, right? And that's dealing with the idea of space, the concept of silence, the concept of like your role in an ensemble, right? And in doing so, there's a lot of different ways to think about it, and these are discussions I'm going to get to later because I want to keep this focus on sequencing and motif development. So just to kind of recap before I say goodbye. Oh, man, I just saw all the messages. Aw, I love you, Cody and Rob. I miss playing music with these guys. Those of you in bands out there, I am sure this is the longest I have ever gone in my entire professional career without playing a show, which felt like, hey, man, it was a nice break, and now oh, man, I'm aching for it, so we're all in it together, right? So, anyways, to recap what I was saying, right, motif and sequencing. So sequencing, taking the same idea and moving it through different things. Another cool way, actually, before we part ways, a really fun way to do some sequencing, okay? So chord players, you're going to like this. Pianists, you'll like this a lot. Guitarists, please try to steal this. I want to hear more guitarists do this. This is a really cool way of voicing it, and I apologize if it's very hard in your hands. I don't know anything about guitar. But check this out. Let's keep with let's do a different key. Let's do F, right? I like F. Right? So if you're doing an F, right? Chordal voicings. This is something I want to get into. Maybe I'll do a little discussion on chordal voicings tomorrow. Q-U-A-R-T-A-L. Fourths. Right? Fourths. Okay? The cool way of doing this, McCoy Tyner, who unfortunately passed away recently, a huge influence on my playing, he would do these great motions, right? Where he like... Right, all I'm doing, right, so I'm pedaling F and C. So those of you who think of power chords, it's an F power chord underneath. And then what I'm doing is I'm building an F chord stacking in fourths. So 1, 4, 7, 1, 4 flat 7. Right, and you can move it around. Again, sequencing. Sequencing is like the most important element of playing out. You can sit there and say, well, like sound effects and pedals. And yeah, if you're thinking like jam band, psych rock, yes, absolutely. Sound design is really huge, and we can discuss that very soon too, because I have all my toys out, right? But really, like harmonic outside playing, a lot of the convincing elements of outside playing is that of sequencing, right? Moving the same idea around, because if you just decide to go out, if you just say, screw it, man, I'm going to throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, you're going to find that you're just making a mess. And hey, look, it might look like the letter S. So there might be like one little moment of lucidity or clarity. But what ends up happening is you're just there. It's entropy, right? Like controlled entropy, which is oxymoronic, right? Is like you have to bottle the chaos. You have to make sure that there's always like one skin cell in reality, okay? Because if you're going way too far out, your audience gets alienated, right? And that's a lot of young bands who are like, man, we're gonna play out, and it's like cool for like the first 8 bars, it's great, but if you don't bring it back in, things are getting lost, man. Like you're off in the woods, right? And another metaphor, because you'll know in my teaching, I love metaphors, right? Imagine you are hiking in the woods, right? And those of you who hike regularly, you're looking for the correct color blazes, right? Then if you become a more advanced hiker, you're like, all right, cool. I see that there's the green blaze right here. What if I go off trail, right? A very advanced hiker is going to be able to still navigate their way back to the trail without any issues, any hiccups. a younger or more novice, and this is not to downplay or saying that like if you're playing you are a novice. No, but like we are all learning. We're all different stages of our like comprehension of harmony and time, whatever, right? But if you're like more on the beginning side, the more novice side, or like just starting to dabble with like self-efficiency in that regard, it's like being sent into the woods with no survival, no compass, anything, right? And you're going to have a hard time to get back, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like sometimes the song dictates you need to go off into the woods, right? But sometimes you need to keep it reined in. So sequencing is such a unique and fanciful tool that you can sit there and say, cool, man, I'm going to start tinkering with the idea of going out, because if the band then picks up on it, then everyone starts going out. And what happens is it becomes this like amoeba. You start moving around in these great ways. So let me show you, right? Chordal voicing, stacking in 4. So we're starting in F. Right? Again, talking about what I did before to tie it all together. The constant, right? F. I'm not moving around. I'm not going. Now, I would do that if there was a bassist, right? If a bassist is holding down F man, oh, perfect. Then I can sit there and scooch around all the different keys. But if I'm self-sufficient right now, because unfortunately we're in lockdown and none of my musicians live with me, we have to stick with something that is the constant, right? You got to keep the listener in, right? So sequencing, sticking with a constant, taking the same shape and idea and moving it around. All right. To recap, motif. Motif, small development, right? If you're an English major, motif is like themes, like what does the color red and the catcher rye mean, right? You know, things like that, right? So you have to think about motif as small idea, small little nugget. So for me, the idea I came up was like something like, I don't know, something like that, right? On the D minor and the Moog, right? But the idea is that idea was fairly consistent. It stayed in there, but then I would branch out and I'd come back. And I'd branch out further and I'd come back. And I'd branch out even further and further and further, where you think you didn't know I still remembered, and bam, you bring it back. And that's what engages the listener, because they feel like they're in on the joke. They're like, oh man, dude, I recognize that. I know that, right? It's like when you quote songs in your solos, right? It's a big trash tradition, right? Like if you're just playing like a bebop solo and starts like doing like Slow Boat to China or like All of Me, right? People are like, oh man, I know that song, right? Keep your audience engaged in that regard, because improvisation is a risk, right? You're jumping out of that plane with no parachute, guys. And it's a beautiful thing, because sometimes you catch that current and, man, you land to safety. Sometimes the current catches you and you tumble. Hey, man, I've had many failures on stage in that regard, and that's part of it, is being okay with the failure of it. So take these tools. Don't be afraid to mess up, right? Once again, I thank you so much for tuning in on this wonderful, was it Wednesday? I don't even know what day in the week it is anymore. Been fortunate enough to have some students throughout the week. Thank you so much for those of you who've been reaching out and donating. Seriously, just the generosity is humbling. It's amazing, the community that you guys have built around this. If you want to sign up for private lessons, I've got time in my schedule. I would love to sit down one-on-one with you. If you feel like donating, please check the info at the bottom of your screen, and any and everything is always welcome. I will try to do this again tomorrow, but in the meantime, y'all have a great night. Tune into some of these incredible live streams. I've been seeing a few. They're awesome. I love it. I was sitting with my daughter in my lap, and she was totally rocking to Phil from Escapers. He was crooning. It was killer, man. I absolutely love it. So you guys are the greatest, and I will see you all tomorrow.